Today I'm going to tell you a story so powerful, it may leave you holding your breath long after it ends, set in the vast American West, where dust rides the wind and every horizon hides danger. It's a land where survival is never guaranteed, and a single choice can change the fate of an entire family. This is where courage and desperation meet under a sky that never seems to end. And it all began with something small. A folded bank notice on a weathered porch, quiet enough to overlook, yet strong enough to set one young rancher on a journey that would test the limits of fear, loyalty, and the price of saving a home. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The porch boards creaked under Nora Kane's boots, the same gray planks her father Jed had nailed down 40 years earlier, when the Circle M was nothing but a promise and a handful of bony longhorns. Early morning light slanted low across the yard, gilding the dust and stretching long shadows from the windmill that hadn't turned right since the drought of '76. The air smelled of dry mesquite and cedar smoke, sharp and familiar, the way home always smelled when nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. Nora stood alone, back straight, the foreclosure notice trembling only because her fingers wouldn't stop clenching it. $3,200. Due by October 12th, 1878. Harlan Voss's neat banker's hand stared up at her cold as the ink was dry. 60 days. 60 days, and every acre her grandfather had bled for every fence post Jed had set. Every winter night, he'd sat right here telling stories of Kansas railheads and double prices would belong to the bank. She could hear the last of the cattle lowing thin and tired out beyond the holding pen, 60 head at most. Not nearly enough. Nora exhaled slowly, the breath scraping her throat. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. The anger was deeper than tears, a slow coal fire buried under ash. She read the worst line again aloud this time, though no one was near enough to hear except the wind. Ranching is not suitable work for a young woman. Her voice stayed level. Her knuckles went white. The screen door squealed on its hinges. Cole's stepped-out hair still mussed from sleep, rubbing one eye with the heel of his hand. 17 and still growing into Jed's shoulders. But the confusion in his face was all boy. "Sis?" "What's the paper?" She folded it, once, twice, tucked it into the breast pocket of her faded shirt. The movement was deliberate, almost gentle, the way she used to fold Jed's spare bandanas when he came in from branding. She looked down at the porch planks. One of her father's boot prints was still there, pressed deep into the soft wood years ago, and never quite worn away. Right beside it now, her own print, smaller, fresher, laid down yesterday, when she'd paced the same boards, trying not to think about the letter in her pocket. The two prints lay close, almost touching, as though someone had placed them side by side in the night. No one had explained how. Cole waited. He always waited when she went quiet like this. Nora lifted her eyes to meet his gray ones, same as Jed's, same as hers. Steady now, though, something flickered behind them. "Bank notice," she said. Cole's mouth opened, closed. He swallowed. "How much?" $3,200. Due in 60 days. The number landed between them like a stone dropped in a dry well. Cole's face paled, but he didn't look away. He never looked away when she needed him to hold the gaze. "We can't sell enough," he started, then stopped. "Not even close." "No," she agreed. "We can't." Silence stretched. A horse stamped in the corral. Somewhere far off, a cow bawled once weakly. The wind moved through the mesquite, dry leaves scraping like old paper. Nora felt the weight of the notice against her chest, heavier than the colt at her hip. She thought of the stories Jed used to tell on winter nights, trails thick with dust and danger mavericks running wild south of here, free for whoever could catch them. She thought of 3 generations of Kane blood soaked into this ground. She thought of Harlan Voss's thin smile last spring. Perhaps it's time you accepted your station, Miss Kane. Her jaw tightened. Cole watched her face. He knew that look. He'd seen it when she was 12 and a rattlesnake had cornered her pony. When she was 15 and their mother's grave was still fresh. When Jed's cough turned wet and final. "Sis," he said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Nora drew a long breath. The air tasted of dust and cedar smoke and the faint iron smell of rain that never arrived. She looked past Cole at the horizon, at the empty miles of gray that used to carry 1,000 head. Then she looked back at him. "Prepare the horses," she said. 1 sentence, no explanation, no promise it would work. "We're going to gather cattle." Cole blinked. His mouth parted, but no sound came. He searched her face for the joke, for the hesitation, for anything that would let him keep pretending the world hadn't already tilted. There was nothing. Nora turned toward the barn. Her boots scuffed the porch, brushing half of Jed's old print without meaning to. She didn't look back to see if Cole followed. Behind her, the wind rose sudden and dried sweeping dust across the planks. It rattled the loose boards, stirred the hem of her skirt, and carried away the last faint echo of her father's boot mark. No one answered. No one had to. The decision was already moving like a herd scenting water after too long without. Nora stepped off the porch into the yard. The sun was climbing now, burning off the last cool of dawn. She felt Cole's footsteps hesitate, then follow slow at first, then quicker catching up. She kept walking. In the quiet that followed, the 2 boot prints remained on the gray wood, father and daughter side by side in the slanting light. They looked almost peaceful. But the paper in her pocket was still there, folded small and burning against her heart, and the 60 days were already ticking down. Somewhere out beyond the mesquite, a lone rider appeared on the far ridge, silhouetted against the pale sky, just a shape. Hat horse, no details. He didn't move closer. He only watched. Nora's hand drifted to the butt of Jed's old Colt, fingers curling around the grip, familiar and cold. The rider stayed motionless a moment longer. Then he turned his horse and was gone. Nora stood still, watching the empty ridge. The wind kept moving, carrying dust across the yard. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. But the quiet felt different now, thinner, like the moment before a storm breaks. And the ranch waited, holding its breath. The mesquite thicket south of the Circle M was a maze of thorns and shadow. The kind of place that tore leather and hid things that didn't want finding. Noon sun hammered down, turning the air thick and metallic sweat, stinging Nora Kane's eyes as she eased her mare through tangled branches. Dust coated her throat, bitter with the scent of crushed grass and cowhide. Her cropped hair clung damp under Jed's old hat, the brim pulled low to shade her face. The cotton strips binding her chest chafed with every breath, but she kept her shoulders square, her voice low when she called to Cole. "Keep 'em tight, Cole. Don't let that steer break." Cole, 2 lengths behind, nodded without looking, his reins taut, as he nudged a stray maverick back toward the small bunch they'd gathered. 100 head, maybe 150 snagged from these wild draws over 3 grueling days. Not enough yet, but closer. The lowing of the cattle mingled with the dry scrape of mesquite leaves, a restless hum that filled the silence between them. Nora's right hand ached where she gripped the reins, the skin raw from hours of roping. She didn't notice the thorn until it drove deep, a mesquite spine catching her palm as she pushed through a narrow gap. Blood welled fast, soaking her cuff. She hissed more from surprise than pain and wiped it on her pants, leaving a dark smear. No time to stop. No time to bandage. She glanced back at Cole. His face set eyes on the herd. He hadn't seen. They found the calf near a dry wash, half hidden in the brush, its flank marked with a shallow cut. Nora dismounted boots, sinking into soft dirt, and knelt beside it. The wound wasn't fresh, too clean, too deliberate. A faint loop of rope burn circled its neck, old and frayed, not their hemp. Someone had been here. Someone had left this as a sign. Cole reined up beside her, his shadow falling across the calf. Who did that? His voice was tight, not quite steady. Nora didn't answer. Her eyes traced the ground, hoof prints fresh, but mixed with the scuff of a boot heel, not theirs. The air felt heavier now, the quiet wrong. She stood brushing dirt from her knees and met Cole's gaze. His gray eyes, so like Jed's, searched hers for an answer she didn't have. Doesn't matter, she said, pitching her voice low, rough, the way she'd practiced. We keep moving. But it did matter. She felt it in the prickle along her spine and the weight of the folded notice still tucked against her chest. 57 days left. She couldn't afford to stop, couldn't afford to wonder who was watching. If Harlan Voss caught wind of her out here playing cowboy with cropped hair and a bound chest, he'd call her bluff before she ever reached Kansas. They pushed on the sun, climbing higher, the heat pressing like a hand on her back. Nora's hand throbbed now, the blood drying to a sticky crust. She ignored it, urging the herd toward the holding pen near the ranch. The cattle moved grudgingly, horns clacking, dust rising in thin clouds. Cole rode flank, quieter than usual, his shoulders hunched like he felt the eyes, too. She thought of Jed, leaning on the corral rail years ago, his pipe smoke curling into the dusk as he talked of mavericks and men who took what wasn't theirs. Cattle don't belong to anybody till they carry your mark, he'd said. She could almost hear his voice now, low and certain, but it didn't steady her the way it used to. They reached the pen as the sun dipped low, painting the mesquite red against the sky. The cattle milled inside the new brush fence, lowing softly. Nora swung down from her mare boots, sinking into the dirt. Her hand burned the thorn wound hot and angry, but she didn't look at it. Cole dismounted beside her, breathing hard. 150, he said, voice rough. Maybe more. Nora nodded once. It's a start. She walked to the fence, resting her forearms on the top rail. The cattle's breath steamed in the cooling air, their dark shapes settling against the dusk. She felt Cole's eyes on her, waiting for something, a plan, a promise. She didn't have either. Then she saw it. On the far ridge, silhouetted against the fading light, a lone rider. Just a shape-hatched horse, no details. He didn't move closer. He only watched. Nora's hand drifted to the colt at her hip, fingers curling around the familiar grip. Her heart kicked hard, but she kept her face still. Cole followed her gaze, his breath catching. "Who's that?" he whispered. She didn't answer. The rider stayed motionless a moment longer, then turned his horse and vanished into the shadow of the ridge. The wind rose, carrying the faint musk of cattle and the sharp bite of mesquite smoke. Nora stood there, hand on her gun, the thorn wound pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She thought of the calf's rope, burned the boot scuff, in the wash, the 60 days ticking down. Someone knew they were out here. Someone who shouldn't. She turned back to the pen, her boots scuffing the dirt. The cattle shifted, restless, their lowing softer now, but no less uneasy. Nora didn't speak. She didn't need to. The quiet stretched heavy and thin, like the moment before a rope snaps. And the ridge stayed empty, watching them still. The Dust Boots saloon smelled of old tobacco, spilled whiskey, and the sour sweat of men who hadn't seen soap in weeks. Oil lamps hung from blackened rafters, throwing weak yellow light across scarred tables. and the sawdust floor that soaked up everything spilled. Laughter rolled through the room in rough waves, broken by the clink of bottles and the slap of cards on wood. Nora Kane pushed through the batwing doors alone. She'd left Cole with the horses outside tied to the hitch rail, told him to stay put. No sense risking two of them being recognized. Her hair was cropped ragged under the brim of Jed's old hat, the one he'd worn when he still walked these streets. The shirt hung loose, sleeves rolled to hide the bandage she'd finally wrapped around her thorn-torn hand that morning. Chest bound flat with strips of cotton torn from an old sheet. Boots scuffed just enough to look lived in. She kept her shoulders square chin, up the way she'd practiced in the cracked mirror back home. Every step felt like walking on a rope stretched over a canyon. The noise hit her like a wall. She moved straight to the bar, not looking left or right, though she felt the eyes. A knot of cowboys at the nearest table turned their heads, sizing up the newcomer. Nora walked over Boots, deliberate on the boards. She stopped at the edge of the table. "Looking to hire," she said. "Trail drive north, Kansas. 3 weeks. Good pay for a man who knows the work." The man studied her a long moment. The other players kept their eyes on their cards, but the room had gone a shade quieter. "Reed Harlan," he said, extending his right hand without rising. "Been up the trail more times than I care to count." She took the hand. Firm grip calluses like leather. She matched the pressure. "Drew," she said. 340-some head. Small crew. We move fast." Harlan didn't let go right away. "Young for a trail boss, aren't you?" Nora met his gaze. "Age doesn't matter if you know cattle." A beat. Then he released her hand, leaned back, and smiled just a flicker. "Fair enough. What's the pay? 50 for the drive. Bonus if we reach Dodge without losing stock." Murmurs around the table. 50 was good money. Most outfits paid 30, maybe 40 if the trail was rough. Harlan tapped his cards on the table once. "Catch, no catch. Just need someone reliable. We leave in 3 days." He considered her again. Longer this time. She felt the weight of it, felt the saloon's eyes on her back. Her heart hammered against the binding cloth, loud enough she was sure he could hear it. "What happened to your outfit?" he asked. "Where's the rest of the family?" She swallowed once. "Father died last winter. Pneumonia. It's just me and my brother now, trying to keep what's left." The words came out steady, but they tasted like ash. True, everyone, yet shaped into something else. She hated the lie in the shape, even if the facts were honest. The thought of Cole waiting outside, the thought of Jed's name, dragged through whispers. If this went wrong, it twisted in her gut. If they found out she was a woman playing at being a man, it wouldn't just be her name ruined. It would be Cole's too. And Jed's memory, the man who'd built this life with his hands, would be laughed at in back rooms like this one. Harlan nodded slowly. Something softened in his eyes. Not pity exactly, but recognition. Plenty of young men had been left holding the reins too soon. "All right, Drew," he said. "I'm in. 50 plus bonus. 3 days. Where do we meet?" She gave him directions to the creek crossing north of the ranch. Far enough from town, no one would see them start. "Bring your own gear. We'll have supplies." Harlan stood, gathered his cards. "Don't be late." He extended his hand again. She took it. This time his grip lingered, fingers tightening just a fraction more than necessary, as though testing for something he couldn't name. Nora looked straight into his eyes, brown, steady, searching. For an instant she thought he saw through the hat brim, through the loose shirt, through everything. Then the moment passed. He released her. She turned for the door. The saloon noise swelled behind her again, but it felt distant now. Muffled. She pushed through the bat wings into the night air, cooler, cleaner, carrying the smell of horse sweat and hay from the livery across the street. The darkness swallowed her whole. She walked to where Cole waited with the horses, his face pale in the lantern light from the saloon windows. "He take it," Cole whispered. Nora nodded once. 3 days. Cole exhaled. "You all right?" She didn't answer right away. Her hand throbbed under the bandage. The beer still sat sour in her stomach. She looked back at the saloon doors still swinging gently from her exit. Inside, Reed Harlan would be finishing his hand, maybe thinking about the kid who'd hired him. She felt the weight of the lies settle deeper like dust in her lungs. "Yeah," she said. "Let's ride." They mounted and turned south. Behind them, the saloon lamps flickered, throwing long shadows across the street. Somewhere in the dark, a dog barked once sharp and lonely. Nora kept her eyes on the road ahead. But as they rode away, she glanced back once more. Through the batwing doors, framed in the yellow light, Reed Harlan still sat at the poker table. He hadn't moved. His eyes followed her shadow down the street, not suspicious now. Knowing. The wind came up off the river cold and wet, carrying the smell of mud and the faint iron of the crossing they hadn't yet made. She didn't speak again. The quiet between them felt thinner, like the air before a storm. The 7th night on the trail settled cold and quiet over the open grassland. The fire was small, fed by dry mesquite branches they'd gathered before dusk. Its flames burned low and steady, throwing just enough light to mark the circle of bedrolls and the dark shapes of the cattle bedded down in a shallow swale 50 yards away. 347 head, now their bulk rising and falling in slow, heavy breathing. Wind came out of the north, sharp enough to carry the smell of cured grass and distant rain that never arrived. Nora Kane sat cross-legged a little farther from the fire than usual, back against her saddle blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. The glow didn't reach her face. She preferred it that way tonight. She was tired, bone deep, the kind of tired that made every movement feel borrowed. The thorn wound on her right hand had scabbed over, but still throbbed when she flexed her fingers. She kept them curled inside the blanket. Her eyes stayed on the darkness beyond the firelight, scanning the black line where grass met sky. She told herself it was just watchfulness trail habit. But she knew better. Every time Reed Harlan moved, every time he spoke, she felt the weight of his attention settle on her like a hand on her shoulder. Across the fire, Reed sat on his rolled bedroll, cleaning his Colt Peacemaker with slow, practiced motions. The soft scrape of cloth on metal carried clearly in the still air, steady as a heartbeat. Cole sat between them, knees drawn up, staring into the flames like they held answers. He hadn't said much all day. None of them had. Reed finished the cylinder, clicked it back into place, then spoke without looking up. "Your brother rides like he was born to it." Cole glanced over, uncertain whether the words were for him. Reed's eyes stayed on the gun. You're different." Nora felt the skin on the back of her neck tighten. She didn't move, didn't answer. She kept her breathing even the way she'd learned to do when a steer was about to bolt and you couldn't afford to flinch. Cole shifted. "He's just quiet is all." Reed gave a small nod like he was filing the answer away. "Quiet. Yeah." He holstered the revolver and then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Funny thing, hands like his soft. No rope burns deep enough to scar. No calluses thick from years of hard twine. Most ranch boys got hands like leather by 16. Cole swallowed. Nora could hear it even from where she sat. He worked the books some, Cole said, voice thin. Helped Pa with the tally. Didn't always ride drag. Reed looked at Cole a long moment, then let his gaze drift toward Nora. She felt it like heat on her cheek. And the way he draws Reed went on, voice still low, conversational, smooth. Too smooth, like he practiced in front of a mirror, instead of pulling iron on something that was trying to kill him. Cole opened his mouth, closed it, his hands clenched on his knees. Nora stared into the dark, her heartbeat steady but hard, a dull drum against her ribs. She could join the conversation now. Step in, shut it down, steer it somewhere else. But every word she spoke risked cracking the mask. One wrong tone, one slip in pitch, and the questions would sharpen. Or she could stay where she was, pretend to be half asleep, let Cole carry the weight of the lie alone. Let her little brother stumble through while she hid behind silence. She stayed still. The choice settled in her gut like lead. Reed waited another beat, then leaned back, stretching his legs toward the fire. Doesn't matter, I guess. Long as the herd moves and nobody gets killed. Cole gave a tight nod. Yeah. The fire popped. A log shifted, sending sparks upward in a brief, bright spiral. The wind caught them and carried them into the dark. Nora listened to the cattle breathe, to the soft creak of leather as Cole shifted to the faint crackle of grass under the night breeze. She felt the cold seeping through her blanket into her bones. She was so tired she could have slept right there sitting up, but she didn't dare. Not tonight. Not with Reed watching. She rose quietly, stepped farther into the dark, away from the fire's reach. She settled on a low rise, back to a lone post-oak rifle across her lap. The herd was a dark mass below her, the fire a small orange eye. She could see Cole's silhouette still hunched by the flames. Reed's hat brim tipped toward the stars. She could feel their eyes on her, or thought she could. Maybe it was just the wind. She sat there for hours. The cold deepened. Her wounded hand ached in rhythm with her pulse. She thought of Jed's voice telling stories by this same kind of fire. Tales of trails and trouble and men who didn't come back. She thought of the porch at home, the foreclosure notice folded in her pocket, Harlan Voss's thin smile. She thought of the lie she was living and how every day it grew heavier like wet clay on her boots. Somewhere out in the darkness, a horse nickered low, distant, not one of theirs. The sound could have been the wind through the grass. It could have been something else. Nora's hand tightened on the rifle stock. She didn't move. Then the night split open. 4 shapes materialized from the black. Riders moving slow and deliberate straight toward the fire. Hooves muffled on the grass, but unmistakable. Reed came to his feet in one smooth motion, hand dropping to his holster. Cole scrambled up beside him, eyes wide. Nora rose silently, staying in the shadow of the tree. She watched the riders draw closer, outlines sharpening in the faint starlight. One man in front taller than the others, something metallic glinting in his mouth when he smiled. She felt the cold air burn her lungs. "Visitors," she whispered. Reed's head turned slightly toward her voice, but he didn't speak. The lead rider reined up at the edge of the firelight. His smile widened, showing a flash of gold. The night went still. No one moved. No one spoke. The fire snapped once sharp as a pistol shot. The valley narrowed like a trap, closing limestone ridges, rising sharp on both sides, baked pale by years of sun. The trail ran straight through it, an ancient buffalo path worn deep by hooves and time. The herd stretched long in slow dust, hanging in the still air, the smell of hot hide and manure thick enough to taste. Nora Kane rode point eyes on the lead steers, feeling the weight of every mile behind them. The refusal to Rafe Cutler sat heavy in her gut these past days, a stone she couldn't swallow or spit out. She told herself it was the right call. Now with the walls closing and doubt gnawed harder. Cole worked the left flank, Reed the right. No one spoke much. The cattle lowed, occasionally restless in the heat. Then Reed's voice cracked sharp from the rear. Riders. Ridges both sides. Nora's head snapped up. Her blood turned cold. 8 men on the crests, rifles glinting, spread to cut off retreat. Below at the valley mouth, Rafe Cutler rode forward with 3 more blocking the way out. His gold teeth flashed as he grinned. Afternoon drew, he called, voice carrying easy over the lowing cattle. Time to settle up. Whole herd now, boy. Horses and gear, too. Can't have you trailing us. Nora reined her mare hard, wheeling to face him. The herd slowed, bunching uneasy. Her hand dropped to the colt at her hip, Jed's old .45 heavy and familiar. She felt the tremor start in her fingers, the same tremor she'd hidden since San Antonio. If they surrendered, the ranch was gone. Everything. If they fought. She didn't let herself finish the thought. Reed's revolver cleared leather first. The crack echoed off the limestone like thunder trapped in a box. One rider on the ridge jerked, tumbled from his saddle horse, bolting. The valley exploded. Rifles answered from the heights, bullets whining past, kicking dust at the herd's feet. The cattle surged, eyes rolling white, a wall of horn and muscle starting to break. Nora drew, heart slamming against her ribs. She sighted on Rafe's horse, not the man, the horse, and pulled the trigger. The animal screamed, reared legs buckling. Rafe pitched forward, hitting the ground hard, rolling as his mount thrashed. Nora's hand shook now, the recoil jarring up her arm, smoke stinging her eyes. The first shot she'd ever fired at another living thing. Not a man, but close enough. The smell of powder burned her throat. Stay with the herd, she shouted, voice raw. The stampede hit full, 347 head thundering forward, a brown avalanche down the narrow valley. Dust choked the air, hooves drumming like war drums. Cole yelled something lost in the roar, riding hard to keep the left from breaking wide. Reed fired steady from the rear, picking at the ridgemen, forcing them to cover. Nora spurred into the chaos. The lead steer, a big brindle brute with horns wide, as a man's arms, charged, blind with terror. She rode neck and neck, wind tearing at her hat dust, blinding. The ground shook under her. One slip and she'd be trampled, gone under in seconds. She leaned far out, a left hand, reaching fingers closing on the hot, rough horn. The steer tossed its head, nearly pulling her from the saddle. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she held with her right the wounded one. The scab split open, fresh blood welling warm and slick. She drew and fired twice into the air above its head, sharp cracks cutting through the panic. The steer slowed, confused head turning. The wave behind rippled, animals bunching, momentum breaking. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat poured down Nora's face, mixing with dust into mud on her cheeks. Her arms burned, lungs on fire, but the herd milled, slowed, stopped. Panting, she released the horn, sat back in the saddle. The valley quieted to heavy breathing, and the distant cry of a wounded horse. Rafe Cutler scrambled behind a boulder hat, gone, face scraped raw. Reed had him pinned, rifle steady. 2 rustlers lay still on the ridge. The others had scattered. Nora walked her mare forward, reins loose in trembling hands. The cattle stood milling, sides heaving. She felt the shake in her knees now, the aftershock of what she'd done. She drew a breath that tasted of blood and powder. Your ambush failed, she called, voice carrying clear across the dust. Time to negotiate. Rafe didn't answer from behind the rock. Silence fell thick and sudden. Reed lowered his rifle a fraction, turned his head toward her. For the first time since San Antonio, his eyes held no questions, only recognition, something steady, almost respect. Nora met his gaze. She felt the weight of the shot she'd fired, the risk she'd taken, the herd still breathing around her. No going back now. The wind stirred the dust between them, slow and deliberate. Rafe lifted his head just enough to meet her eyes. He studied her a long beat. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Deal," he said. "You've earned it." He rose slowly, hands still open, no sudden moves. He backed away toward the far side of the boulder, eyes never leaving hers. When he reached the shadow of the ridge, he turned, whistled once sharp, and disappeared into the draw. The sound of hooves faded fast. The valley went still again. Nora exhaled, the breath ragged. Her hands loosened on the reins. She hadn't realized how tight she'd been holding them. The dried blood on her glove cracked as she flexed her fingers. Reed rode up beside her, close enough she could smell the burnt powder on his coat. "That type fold when someone stands up to them," he said quietly. "Most times." Nora looked at him. His face was calm, but his eyes held something new. She nodded once. "Let's move." They turned the herd. The cattle stirred reluctantly, lowing hooves scraping stone as they started forward again. Cole fell in on the left face, pale but steady. Nora took point once more, though every step felt heavier now. The valley walls fell away behind them. The two bodies on the ridge lay where they fell. No time to bury, no time for anything but moving. As the trail widened into open grass, Nora glanced back. The narrow path looked smaller already, a scar in the limestone. Two dark shapes still sprawled on the slope. She felt the sight settle in her chest, cold and permanent. She'd bought time, she'd bought passage, but she'd also bought something else. Reed rode up alongside her again, matching pace. "You saved the herd," he said, low enough the wind almost took it. "But you just painted a target on your back." Nora didn't answer. She looked down at her right hand. The steer's blood had dried to a cracked brown crust across her knuckles, flaking where the skin moved. She stared at it a long moment, the way it clung, the way it wouldn't come off easy. She flexed her fingers once. The scab split wider, fresh red welling up. The herd moved on, dust rising slow in the late light. The valley fell farther behind, but the weight didn't. Nora kept her eyes forward. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. But the quiet carried a new sound now, the faint distant thud of hooves somewhere out of sight following. The Red River rolled south like a vein of rust swollen from rains in the high plains. Its brown water churned fast against the banks, carrying broken branches and red mud that stained everything it touched. The air reeked of wet earth and rotting vegetation laced with a faint metallic bite. The herd, 331 head, now stood bunched on the north bank heads, low tails switching at flies, lowing uneasily at the river's roar. Nora Kane sat her mare a few yards back, hat brim dripping from the morning mist that clung to the grass. The bandage on her right hand was soaked through pink with old blood. She stared at the water. It moved too quick, too heavy. She'd crossed creeks before, but nothing like this. Nothing that could take a horse and rider under in seconds. Nora's chest felt tight, not just from the cold. The girl who'd stood on the Circle M's porch was gone. She'd shot at a man's horse. She'd ridden into a stampede. She'd bought their lives with a promise she didn't trust. There was no going back to waiting anymore. Hooves sounded behind them. Many hooves. 15 riders appeared on the rise, driving a mixed bunch of stolen cattle and horses. They moved slow, deliberate, the way men do when they know they hold the high ground. The leader rode out front, heavy-set braided beard clothes, patched from Mexican wool and trade blankets. Mateo Reyes reined up 20 yards away, his men fanning out behind him, hands resting easy near weapons. "Fine day for a crossing," he called, voice cutting over the river's noise. Reed answered without turning his horse, "If you like drowning." Mateo laughed short and without warmth. "River's dangerous for a small party. Currents strong, bottoms uncertain. Many cattle lost when green men try alone." Nora felt Cole tense beside her. She kept her face still. "What do you want?" she asked, voice low, steady. Mateo stroked his beard. "We help each other. My men know this river safe routes, deep holes, sandbars that shift. For 16 head, we guide you across. Rope lines swimmers rescue if needed. 16 head." Nora felt the number hit like a fist. They'd fought for every animal in this herd. Now she'd have to give 16 away just to cross a river. She glanced at Cole, his jaw tight, then at Reed. He gave the smallest shake of his head, not no, just caution. 16, she said finally. Half now, half on the other side. Mateo studied her, then smiled, teeth flashing white against the dark beard. Deal. They cut out the first 8 head good stock, young and strong. Nora watched every swing of the rope, every step, feeling each one like a cut. The crossing began in small bunches. The cattle balked at first, horns clacking as they crowded the bank. Nora rode in with the third group, Cole and Reed flanking. The water hit cold and fast, sucking at her mare's legs. She kept steady, talking low to the cattle ahead. They swam heads, high, eyes wide. Halfway across, a young steer panicked. The current caught him, dragged him sideways toward a deep boil. He thrashed, horns flashing, starting to go under. Nora didn't think. She spurred hard. Her mare plunged forward, swimming strong. Water rose to Nora's chest, cold enough to steal her breath. She leaned low, reaching fingers closing on the steer's horn. The animal bucked, nearly pulling her off. She held muscles, screaming, using the mare's momentum to swing the steer back toward the rope line. Reed shouted something she couldn't hear over the roar. She got the steer straight, pushed him toward Mateo's swimmers. They took him the rest of the way. Nora's mare found footing on the north bank. She slid off, boots sinking into mud soaked to the skin. Her chest heaved, water streaming from her hat brim. The herd was across, all but the 16 they'd paid. She stood there, hands on her knees, the river still roaring behind her. One of Mateo's men, Ramon, rode up to his leader on the far bank. He leaned close, voice carrying just enough on the wind. "That boy rides like no boy I've seen." Mateo looked across the water at Nora. His eyes narrowed, then flicked away. He raised a hand. "Deal done," he called, and turned his horse. Nora straightened, wiping water from her face. She felt the tremble in her legs, the burn in her hand, where the old wound had reopened in the cold. She looked at the herd safe on this side. She looked at the river she'd crossed. Reed rode up beside her, slow. He reined in, looked straight into her eyes. Water dripped from his hat, too. "I know who you are," he said. The words landed quiet. Final. Nora held his gaze a long second. Her heart kicked, but she didn't flinch. She thought of Jed's voice telling her once to never give what you can't afford to lose. She thought of Cole watching her now from the herd's edge, his face pale but steady. She thought of the lies she'd carried since San Antonio and how it was fraying like old rope. She turned away, walked her mare toward the herd without answering. Reed didn't push. He didn't need to. The wind came up off the river, cold and wet, carrying the smell of mud and blood and the faint iron of the crossing. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. The secret wasn't a secret anymore. Nora flexed her hand, the wound stinging sharp in the cold. She mounted and took point again, eyes on the horizon where the trail stretched north. The herd moved on hooves, sinking into the soft earth. Cole fell in on the left, Reed on the right. But as they rode, Nora caught a glimpse of movement on the far ridge, a lone rider too far to make out. Not Mateo's men, not Rafe's, just a shadow watching. She kept her eyes forward, hand resting light on the colt. The wind carried a faint whistle, sharp and unfamiliar, like a signal meant for someone else. Nora didn't speak. The quiet felt thinner now, like the air before a blade falls. The grass in Indian Territory stood tall and gold under the morning sun, swaying in a wind that never quite stopped. It whispered against the horses' legs, against the flanks of the cattle. A constant low hiss that filled the silence between riders. Fog lingered from the night, thick enough to blur the horizon, making the world feel smaller, more watchful. The herd moved slow, 301 head now, after the Kiowa toll hooves sinking into soft earth, lowing in tired complaint. Nora Kane rode point hat, low eyes scanning the rolling swells ahead. The Red River was 2 days behind them, but the cold memory of it still clung to her clothes, to her skin. She no longer tried to hide from Reed Harlan's gaze. She felt it sometimes steady, not accusing, just there, like a hand resting light on her shoulder. She didn't speak to him unless she had to. He didn't push. But the distance between them had changed. It wasn't the wary space of strangers anymore. It was the careful space of people who knew something dangerous and hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Cole rode left flank, quieter than usual. The boy who'd once asked endless questions now watched the horizon like he expected it to answer first. Nora saw the strain in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking. She wanted to tell him it was all right. She didn't. Mid-morning, the watchers appeared. 6, maybe 8 riders on the western rise. Dark against the pale sky. They kept pace. Never closer, never farther. Shadows moving parallel to the herd. Reed drifted over from the right flank horse, stepping quiet through the grass. He reined up beside her, voice low. "They know we're here. Better we talk first." Nora looked at the distant riders. They hadn't closed the gap, but they hadn't fallen back either. A sign, a warning. She nodded once. We circle the herd. Defensive. No argument. They worked together. First time it felt like a team instead of 3 people trying not to break. Reed called soft commands from the right. Cole mirrored from the left. Nora rode the center, turning the lead steers inward with gentle pressure from her reins and quiet clucks. The cattle resisted at first, tired, irritable, but they obeyed. Slowly, the long line curved, folded in on itself until the herd stood in a tight oval, heads facing out, bodies packed close, a fortress of hide and horn. Nora dismounted, boots sinking into the soft earth. She walked the perimeter, checking the gaps, feeling the eyes of the distant riders like fingers on her neck. The wind carried the smell of crushed grass and horse sweat and the faint, acrid tang of fear. Her own, maybe. Or the herd's. She didn't know anymore. The Kiowa came on slow, a dark line against the grass. At their head rode a man in a high headdress, face painted black and red, horse painted with handprints. 2 hawk reined up 50 yards out, the others fanning behind him like wings. The wind dropped for a moment. Silence pressed in. Then 2 hawk lifted his voice, clear English, carrying over the grass. "You cross Kiowa land. Pay for grass. Pay for water." Nora felt Cole tense beside her. Reed shifted his grip on the rifle. She looked at Reed. His eyes met hers, no questions, just the same steady recognition she'd seen since the valley. There was no other way. She stepped forward 1 pace. The grass brushed her boots. 50 yards felt like nothing and everything at once. Nora's hand rested on the horn of her saddle, fingers still stained with the memory of the steer's blood. She didn't speak yet. She didn't have to. Two Hawk waited. 30 head, Nora said. Her voice carried steady, but inside something trembled. And a horse for you as chief. Two Hawk tilted his head. The feathers in his headdress moved in the wind. His eyes stayed on her, long, unblinking. You speak boldly for a young warrior, he said. Your father taught you well. The words struck deeper than she expected. She felt the memory rise, Jed leaning on the corral rail, teaching her how to read a horse's mood, how to talk a steer down from panic. She felt the ache of it, sharp and sudden. She pushed it down. Two Hawk waited, the Kiowa waited, the wind waited. Nora nodded once. 30 head and the horse. Two Hawk studied her another long moment, then raised a hand. Two of his men rode forward. Nora turned to Reed. He met her eyes. No argument, no hesitation. He dismounted, led his spare horse a sturdy bay with a white blaze forward. The animal nickered once, soft, confused. Reed rubbed its neck slow, then handed the reins to the Kiowa rider without a word. The cutting began. Nora watched them work her own men and the Kiowa together. Ropes swinging, low voices calling. 30 heads separated slow from the herd, young steers, good cows, animals they'd fought to keep. Each one driven out felt like a piece torn away. She stood still, hands clenched at her sides, feeling the loss in her stomach. Not just numbers. Each animal carried weight. Days in the brush nights, on watch the stampede, she'd stopped with her bare hands. When the 30 were clear, a Kiowa rider took the bay from Reed. The horse balked once and then went quiet. Reed watched it go, face unreadable. Two Hawk raised his hand again, once sharp. His men turned, driving the cattle and the horse away, toward the western swell. A few of the warriors lingered, eyes on Nora, not the herd. Her. One leaned to another, spoke low. Their gazes held too long, curious, searching. Nora felt it like fingers brushing her skin. She kept her face still, but her pulse beat harder. If they guessed, if word reached Texas. Two Hawk wheeled his horse. He looked back once at her, not the herd. Then he turned and led his people away. The line of riders dwindled, swallowed by the grass and the distance. The wind filled the silence they left behind. Nora stood there a long moment, watching the dust settle where they'd been. The herd shifted behind her, restless again. 301 head now. The number echoed in her head like a door closing. Reed walked up beside her, slow. He stopped a pace away. They saw something, he said quietly. Word will spread. Nora didn't answer right away. She looked at the horizon where the Kiowa had gone. The grass moved in waves, hiding nothing. She felt the weight of Reed's words settle beside the weight of everything else. The river, the valley, the lies she'd told, the shots she'd fired. She flexed her hand. The old scar pulled tight, white and thin now, a permanent reminder of mesquite thorns and river cold. Every time she gripped the reins, it would be there. The herd lowed once, soft and tired. Nora turned her mare toward the north trail. The wind came up again, cooler now, carrying the smell of distant smoke and the faint, clean bite of coming rain. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The trail waited, and so did whatever word would follow them. But as they moved on, Nora glanced back once. On the far rise, a single Kiowa rider remained too far to see his face, but close enough to watch. He didn't follow. He only sat his horse motionless until the fog swallowed him. The quiet stretched heavy with what wasn't said. And somewhere ahead, Dodge City waited along with the final price. The porch of the Circle M waited as it always had. Gray boards worn smooth by years of boots. The same boards Nora Kane had paced as a child. The same boards where Jed Kane had sat on evenings when the work was done, and the pipe smoke curled slow into the dusk. Late afternoon light slanted gold across the yard, turning the dust soft and warm. The windmill stood still, no breeze to turn it. The holding pens were empty, the cattle gone to Kansas buyers weeks ago. But the ranch still stood. The debt was paid. Nora stepped onto the porch first. Her boots scuffed the wood, leaving faint red dirt from the trail. She stopped at the edge, looking out over the land, the mesquite thickets south, the open graze, north the low hills where her grandfather had first claimed this ground. The foreclosure notice was gone. Harlan Voss had taken it back. Folded neat signature crossed out. The ranch was theirs again. She felt the quiet of it settle over her, heavy as a blanket soaked in rain. Cole came up behind her, silent. He stood at her shoulder close enough she could feel the warmth of him, but he didn't speak. He'd been quiet since Dodge, watching her, carrying the truth like a stone in his pocket. He was the only witness left who knew every mile, every choice, every lie. He hadn't told a soul. Hooves sounded on the road. Harlan Voss rode up slow, alone, coat still buttoned high against the dust. He dismounted, tied his horse to the rail, and climbed the steps. His eyes flicked over the porch, the house, the empty pens, then settled on Nora. Surprise flickered there, brief and unguarded. "Didn't think you'd make it," he said. Nora met his gaze. She felt the old burn, the way he'd looked at her months ago, the way he'd spoken of her station. It was smaller now, but still there. "We paid in full," she said. Voice flat. No boast, no story. Just the fact. Voss nodded once. He pulled the canceled note from his coat, handed it over. The paper was crisp, ink faded where the debt had been struck through. He looked at her again, longer this time, then at Cole, then back. "Guess you did," he said. He tipped his hat, turned, mounted, and rode away. Dust rose slow behind him. Neighbors came later, 2 old hands from the next spread a widow who'd known Jed. They brought coffee, a jar of preserves, words of relief. They talked to Reed first, heard he'd led the drive, signed the papers in Dodge, brought the money home. Reed answered, quiet, deflecting, letting the story settle on him like dust. Nora stood back, arms folded, letting them talk. She saw the way they looked at her, respectful but puzzled. A girl who'd waited while men did the work. She didn't correct them. She didn't speak at all. When the visitors left, the porch emptied. Cole stayed close, leaning on the rail. Reed walked to the steps, hat in hand. He stopped beside her. "You let it," he said low. "That's enough for me." Nora looked at him. She saw the trail in his eyes, the valley, the river, the Kiowa, the quiet nights when he'd watched her and said nothing. She felt the weight of what he carried for her, the silence he'd chosen to keep. She nodded once. "Thank you." Reed put his hat back on. "I'll be riding on come morning." He stepped down, walked to his horse. Cole watched him go, then turned to Nora. She didn't speak. She walked to the far end of the porch where the board still held the faint outline of Jed's boot print. She stood over it a long moment. Her own boot rested beside it, now smaller, worn from months on the trail, red dirt ground, deep into the leather. 2 prints, father and daughter. The same ground. She looked out over the ranch. The sun had dropped low, painting the grass golden red. Wind stirred the dust, lifting it in small spirals across the yard. She felt the quiet press in the ranch, save the debt gone, the herd sold. She felt the cost of it, too. The shots fired, the lies told, the truth locked away. She'd won. And she'd lost something she couldn't name. Cole stepped beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was the only one who knew. Nora sat on the top step, elbows on her knees, hands loose. She stared across the open land. The wind came up stronger, carrying dust through the porch rails, whispering past her ears. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She sat there a long time. Then she rose slow. She walked to the door, pushed it open. The hinges creaked, familiar, old, unchanged. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The porch stood empty under the last light of day. Dust drifted across the boards. The two boot prints remained father and daughter side by side in the fading gold. The wind kept moving. The ranch waited. And somewhere the story waited too, unspoken, unfinished, carried only in the silence of the three who'd lived it. Cole stood at the rail a moment longer, watching the empty road where Reed had gone. Then he turned and followed his sister inside. The door clicked shut again. The quiet stretched, broken only by the faint creak of settling wood and the endless sigh of the wind through the mesquite. No one spoke. No one had to. But in the stillness, the trail dust still clung to their boots, and the scar on Nora's hand ached faintly, a reminder that some things never quite heal. The ranch stood on, unchanged, on the outside. Inside, everything was different. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.